How we doing today, guys? So today, bit of a change of scenery, do a bit of filming on location, and on this video we're going to look at suspension setup. So actually get into something that I know quite a lot about and have been doing for a long time. Worked with a lot of racers, riders and all sorts of stuff, and got it sort of down to a fine art really. So I'm going to do a video where we actually sort of look at what I do and what you can do and get them things riding on point. Right, so the first thing I want to talk about, which is the kick-off for any suspension setup, is sag, which is how much of this disappears when you apply your weight to the bike. Now, there are a few variables in this, one of them being the amount of sag that you want to run, which is completely dependent on what you ride and how good you ride. But there's still some fundamentals that I can teach you, or you can get your head around, which you can take all them variables and throw them away, and as long as you get this bit right, you're most of the way there already. I would say 70% of a baseline bike setup is sag, and knowing how that works is a fundamental. Right, so let's have a look at that. Right, so sag. Before we even think about or get into numbers and PSI and all that stuff, let's talk about what we're after. So one of the analogies I use is a seesaw principle. Now, this is your bike, right? I know it's a stick, but just for a second, bear with me with this one. Pretend this is your bike. Now, there's you in the middle, right? Now, there you are, sat in the middle of your bike. Now, the only thing that stops your bike from tipping that way and that way, if you're on a full susser, and we are talking full sussers here. The fork is, we'll get into a bit more, but yeah, let's pretend we're talking full sussers. So there's your full susser, right? Now, there's your shock, there's your fork. Now, if you imbalance this, in other words, if you run one softer or harder than the other, what happens when you push it down? Yeah? If the front's softer than the back and you in the middle push down it, the bike tips forwards. Again, back's too soft and you push down in the middle where you are in the middle, bike tips backwards. Now, we obviously aim to ride neutral. We don't want to be over the front and over the back all the time. When we are just doing our riding, sorry, I can hear some over the back. When we do our riding, we ride neutral. So your suspension needs to be neutral. And this is what we use sag for. So when we're setting sag up, we're not interested in what the manufacturer says I'm supposed to be 95 PSI because I weigh 75 kilo. I mean, I'd love to weigh 75 kilo, but what we're looking for is the balance, yeah? Hopefully you get that. Once you get that bit in your head, the seesaw of the bike, the same amount of support either end, if you understand that and get that, then you're there, right? And then it's just about how much do you need and what you want, which we'll talk about, but the balance is the fundamental starter. Get that there and you're already on the right path. If you can't balance your bike, you're always going to struggle to get the handling right. You're going to find it understeers, oversteers, doesn't behave what you want it to do. And I always say this to people, and everyone says, oh yeah, I can get on a bike, sit on a bike, watch the rear shock take up 30% and the fork hardly move. And I can say to these people, does your bike always tend to understeer around corners? Oh yeah, it does it quite a bit, because the front's too hard. When you dip into a corner, compress the bike, your weight goes backwards because the back compresses more than the front, so the front's now light, you turn into a corner, away goes the front. It's not rocket science, it's fairly straightforward, but it's just one of the things you understand. So let's go back to the bike. Let's look at what or how you get the balance. Sounds like a Jedi master trick, but let's have a look at that and then see what you think. Right, so we spoke about balance, and what does that look like on your bike? Because we all can't sit there sticking around and go, what was he on about? So most of us run RockShox or Fox suspension in one variety or another, or Mazzocchi, but let's keep to the common denominators here. If you've got a RockShox fork or even a shock, you've got a result, because on yours you've got a ruler stamped at the back on the stanchions, all right? And that's great because that gives you percentages and all your bits and pieces, so you haven't got to do any kind of funky maths or anything. Now, if you've got Fox, it's a little bit tricky because there's no reference point anywhere. So how do we do it? So let's start off right. Let's assume everyone wants to run 30% sag, because that 30% number is just an easy one to work with. It's roughly a third of your travel, or 30 mil in every 100 mil of travel that you've got. So on a rock shock it says 30%, great stuff. You guys are already sorted that in that department. With a Fox, what I tend to do is measure from the travel it's got, so whether it's a 140, 150, 160, 174, regardless, whatever it is, do that. Times that by 0.3 on your calculator, all right, if you want 30%, or times it by 0.25 if you want 25, but we're sticking with the 30 for now. Whatever that number is, measure up, put your O-ring now, or if you've got a Sharpie, it doesn't really matter because it comes off eventually, and put a little line in there, and they're your aim points. Same for the shock. Measure, times by 0.3, put the O-ring where you want it, or put a black marker. I like a Sharpie marker because if you don't put enough air in, this pushes up there, you've lost your mark. But you put a Sharpie marker now, and I do it, and there's nothing left there. It does rub off eventually. It's your reference point. Once you've got your reference points in, now this is the other thing I say to people: you don't pay any attention to the gauge on your shock, on your shock pump yet. All right. All you're aiming for is put enough air in there, and remember, I'm not going to go into this video about cycling your shocks. You have to push them up and down and charge the negative chamber. Get your 30% on the front and the back, all right? So when you're sat neutrally on the bike, whether it's your common riding position or your attack riding position, whatever you spend the majority of your time riding when you want the handling on the bike, that tends to be most of us, like seat down, stand up on the pedals, in the middle of the bike, 50%, like I said before. Get that in, and then when you sit on the bike, you want to see the O-rings sit 30% front and back. Get that in place, and you know, that's the baseline started. Right, let me show you what that achieves. Okay, so ready? Right, so off that little jump I just did, you can see we've used about 70% of the travel front and back. Now that's me landing properly, so I've landed neutral, I've not gone front heavy or back heavy or anything like that. So ridden my bike properly, done a jump, landed, and the bike was neutral. I mean, this is the extreme end of what we expect from suspension, but it is the proven point. Get your sag right, and that ratio of compression will always be the same front to back until you start throwing volume spaces in, but we're going to talk about that next. But there you go, the fundamentals of sag. Hopefully that's enough for you to understand what you need to achieve. So volume spacers. This is a bit like tuning the sag that you've just set up. So you've got your balance in place, all right? You've done that. You've got your 30% front and back. But when you're riding trails, you find that the forks tend to be using slightly more travel than the back. Time for volume spacers. So what you can do is you've got your 30% dialed in front and back. Don't be tempted to then put more air in the front to stop it from bottoming out, because then all you're doing then is affecting the balance of the sag between the front and rear. Leave it alone. That's your baseline setting. In fact, once you've got your baseline setting, that's when you can use your gauge, because you can turn around and write 30% is X amount of PSI front, X amount of PSI. Write that down somewhere, so every time you want to go and get your bike out the back of your van or wherever it is you want to ride, you want a quick check, you just screw it in and go 95% or 95 PSI, for example. That's my number. Bosh, I know that will give me 30% sag. Job done. The volume spacers, now this is to stop it from bottoming out, or to get it to bottom out the same as the back. I mean, don't forget, you're running like an 160, 170 mil fork. There's nothing wrong with using 160, 170 mils. It's there to use. It's just whether you use it more than the back, and you know you've ridden the bike right. You know, if you go over the end of a jump and go in nose heavy and you bottom the front out but not the back, it's probably you. It's not really the bike. But you do the perfect jump, you land, you do it all pucker, you think, well, if I filmed that, I look like a pro, and the front's still bottoming out, get a volume spacer in there. Don't just use them because they're there. Everyone think, well, Fox make them, I've got to use them. Tend to be, the heavier the rider you are, there's less inclination for you to use them. I've got 170mm fork, I use one volume spacer, I weigh 105 kilo. Yeah, and you just see me do, well, not see me, yeah, no, you have just seen me do a jump. I'm going to film and edit in a bit. You just see me do a jump, and you use the same front and back. I've only got one volume spacer. So yeah, if you only weighed 60 kilo, you're going to run less initial air pressure to get your 30% sag. Which then means your spring rate is not going to be as steep as someone who weighs 100 kilo, who's got a higher initial volume than you. So that's when you're going to more likely put volume spacers in to try and get that spring rate to come up to keep up with the rear end. Right? That's what front volume spacers are all about, and that's why you may or may not need to use them. Now, the rear, if you had like most of the, like, you know, your standard rear shocks that you see almost like Float X's, DPS, Fox DPS's, Super Deluxes, all the rest of it. They use volume spacers as well, in much the same way you do in the front. So, 30% sag, but it's still, you know, diving through travel. Don't be tempted to throw more in there. And if you do put more in there, remember we said 30% was a benchmark. 25%, most people wouldn't recommend going more than 25% sag, otherwise the bike's going to be rock hard. So yeah, going through travel, you know, you can put volume spacers here. X2, bit different. X2 doesn't have positive volume spacing. It has negative volume spacing because it holds a massive amount of air in this can in here, this outer can, which is a negative air can. You can tune these to be softer and harder in the initial movement, so you can get them to be really soft and they ramp up. So they work the other way around. They have an initial soft that you can then take away from it to make the top end firmer. That makes sense? But remember, key bit is the sag. Right, now the witchcrafty bit, damping. The one thing I often get asked about is, what do I do with damping? Now, this is far more personal than like the baseline sag stuff, and is the fine tuning of the ride. Now, out the two, the biggest one is rebound, which on most stuff is the red dial. I'm hoping anyone watching this video kind of goes, yeah, Nick, I know what that is, which is good, because if I'm having to tell you what is rebound on your fork and on your shock, then you're probably already a little bit out of your depth, and you might be better off going to ask for a bit of advice. But let's assume you know what rebound and compression is now and what the adjustments are on your bike. Rebound, what does rebound do? Rebound is when you squash your shock, how fast it jumps back out again. Same as your fork, how far you squash your fork, how fast it banks. It's the speed control of the rebound of the spring. So why is that important, you know? And why do I not need to max it all the way out? Because I know what everyone says, oh, I like it slow, I don't like being bucked over the front. You've got to remember, this is only to aid you. Most of riding a bike is down to you. So if you need to wind your rebound all the way up to stop you from bucking over the front of the bike, is that all down to the shock, or is there an element where you're being a little bit lazy and not moving around the bike probably as much as you could be? Or are you riding a little bit outside your skill limit and you're just trying to find a way to make it easier rather than sort of going off and having a bit of a think or a learn or whatever you need to do on controlling the bike? So again, we're going to get the assumption that you all know what you're doing. Everyone knows how to ride a bike. What do I do with this and what do I recommend? Now, pretty simple this one, with rebound. I set rebound up. So when I push the bike and let it go, it comes up as fast as possible, but without the wheel leaving the floor. Yeah, front and back, same rule, same thing. Push the bike down, let it go, and watch it come up, and so it comes up like that, but the wheel doesn't go boom, boom, and off the floor. That's my fundamental go-to with rebound tuning, because you want that wheel to move up and down as fast as possible. It's not just up and down. If you slow the rebound down, you compound your travel. So that'll go in, and because it can't get back out fast enough, it stays sunk halfway in the travel or 3/4 way in travel, and then you hit a bigger bump and you've only got a quarter of your travel left to use because you're running it so slow it absorbs. So fast as possible, give as much time for that shot to get back out and extend, and also keep that wheel on the floor, because that's what we need to do. These tyres don't do nothing in the air. They need to be pushed in the brown stuff. So keeping the bike on the floor, keep it tracking. You hear people say, yes, tracking is exactly what it is. Keep that tyre tracking on the ground, yeah, out as fast as possible. So in, back down, keep on the ground, quick as I can. The reason why I look for the wheel to not lift off the floor, because if you hit ruts and bumps, I've been saying about bucking over the front, if you hit ruts and bumps, and the bike then is rebounding too fast and it's kicking you, it's lifting the tyre off the floor. So now you've got no grip. So you want it to be tyre on the floor, fast as possible. So bumps and holes in the ground, imagine you've got that on the ground, you want the tyre to move in and out. You don't want the tyre to bounce up in the air, and you don't want the bike to go squash, 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 squash. As fast as possible, tracking the ground. Now, if you've got a fancy bike like this that's got iron low speed rebounds, this is just made the problem a little bit more complicated. So what we just spoke about then is high speed rebound. Low speed rebound is when you're pedaling, the bike's bobbing up and down, or you're going around corners and it's squashing and going like this. It's that slow relax. So it's not took a thump, it's just took a squash. It's that slow rebound speed. Again, same principle, but what I tend to do in my one is I'll have a bit of a ride around something I know, do a few corners and bits and pieces, and just keep mindful how much grip there is. So I'll literally like go around a corner like something quite bumpy, and if it feels a bit loose, I'll click a couple of clicks of low speed rebound in and see if that feels better, because this is slow movement. It's not something you can sort of physically check sitting like this. You just add it in until it feels about right. But the principle is the same. It's all about getting that back wheel, front wheel on the floor for grip, whether that's from after a big hit or whether just it's undulating fast as possible. So all the way off, add it in, check, add it in, check. When it's about there, ride it, see what it's like. Now, compression. This one, probably the easiest to get right and wrong, and how much you want to use it. So if you're big hitting rider, like a bit of jumping and stuff, you probably find the high speed compression, because there are two types, like the rear. High speed one, this basically gives you a hydraulic speed control of the compression of your suspension. What's that mean? So you've got your 30% sagging, everything's right, everything's balanced, but then, you know, every now and then you'll go like bang, and it will soak up a load of travel. You can basically click this in, yeah, add it in to help slow that down. So without affecting sag, and so without affecting that baseline handling, you can basically turn compression up to stop the sudden whack of travel. The problem with that is that happens all the time. So even if you're going through 25%, that control is in place. With high speed compression, I say to most trail riders and general riders, you don't need to use it. All right? When you're riding through a trail and bits and pieces, you want that to move as natural as possible. So high speed there is like a get out, you know. And I'll tell you now, my bike naturally runs none on the front, without knocking it over, and 4 clicks of high speed on the rear, because I want the suspension to move as freely as possible and do its job. If I was going to North Wales or in the Alps and bits and pieces, I might put a couple of clicks in to support depending on what I'm riding. But then if I find I'm getting arm ache because how much feedback I'm getting, I'll take it back off again. So high speed compression is like it's an aid. You don't need to have it used, you don't need to use it. Low speed compression, bit of a different story. So low speed, bit like I said with low speed rebound, it's low speed compression, so it's soft compressions. And you'll find you'll get most of that when you're turning in like berms or sort of nice punches in corners, braking and pedaling. Pedaling being probably the one thing you'll get the most use of at low speed compression. When you're pedaling your bike, you'll see, if you look at your rear shock, you'll see it bod bouncing away, yeah? Low speed compression basically puts resistance into the low speed movement into that, so basically you can get rid of bob, same as the front. Pedaling away, even when you're climbing, you don't want that. That's nicking energy off you. You can put low speed in, slow it down. So you won't eliminate it, but it'll just become like a slow bob. So when adjusting low speed compression, it's probably best sort of having a play and see what you get. So throw a couple of clicks in, have a pedal, see what the difference is, throw a couple more clicks in, or turn it all the way up and then keep backing off until you just start to get movement. Then you know you're kind of there. And that's for people who pedally trail riders. For you guys out there like a bit of gravity, low speed compression, you'll probably find more use of like in berms and braking. So if you're going into corners and you're braking, it's like 3/4 of your travel is just disappearing. Chuck some low speed compression in, because what that will do is that will support as the bike dives, but without impacting any of the big hit stuff, which is where your high speed compression makes the difference. So hopefully you get what that means. Yeah, low speed for low speed stuff, high speed for high speed stuff. One other thing that can help you with all of this as well, if you're still not confident enough to get the adjustments, is RockShox do a app. I can't remember what it's called because I used it for a while. But if you go on your app stores, whatever it is, and search RockShox, you'll see it come up. That gives you some good tuning baselines. Careful though, when they give the sag measurements on there, every time I've tried it, it's ended up being too hard, way too hard. They say, oh, your sag for this is this, and you're not testing, it's like 15-20%. It's well off, so keep an eye on that. On the Fox one, you can go on Ride Fox for specs and bits and pieces and for tuning, but also if you've bought new, the training manuals that come with Fox actually give you some of the sorry, don't give you, or do they? Actually, I think they do. They still give you the tuning guidelines. So jump on the scales, tell it wherever you are how much sag you want, and it'll tell you how many roughly clicks of damping. And the Fox one's actually pretty good. I've run off the book Fox tunes before and they've been about right. They're safe, so they run a little bit slower just to not catch you out. And someone who's been riding along as me, you know, kind of know my way around and do bits and pieces on a bike, I'll be like, well, no, I want it faster than that because I know how I want it to be. But for guys out there who are watching videos like this to try and get an idea of what they need to do, the Fox stuff's pretty good. And so's the damping side for RockShox, but just mind the air pressure recommendations of RockShox. They tend to be a bit firm. Right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a couple of bits of riding and show you some of the stuff we've talked about working in practice. So, ready for this bit? Now that last one was a bit of a kicker off of that down into there. So we expect to see some travel usage, and there was, but good thing is, point in case. We didn't bottom out, but on the Kashima mark, front and back, so that was off of there, right? Not a biggie, don't get me wrong, ain't a monster, but we went out about 15 foot, landed straight on that root knuckle. So reliant on suspension doing its job, and hang on, just jump down. Oh. It did, and that is all done on sag and a little bit of damper tuning.